DreAllDay.com.
Now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. Dre, what is that? Personal initiative. That is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques all underneath the umbrella of one unified philosophy that is called work on your game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is the fixable reasons why people disagree. Yes, I'm going to explain to you why people disagree and the fixable reasons why it happens, and of course, what to do about it. But before we get into that, I remind everybody I send out a text message every day, guaranteed to have you focused, sharp, and on point. I call this the daily motivation. I send one out every week, also called the Monday motivation. Again, as of the date that I'm recording this, we're having some tech issues with the text. So if you're in my text community, you haven't gotten any text from me in the month of November 2023, I did not kick you out. I did not stop sending the text. Well, the text stopped going out, but I did not plan to have it stop. We're just working out some tech issues. As soon as we get that fixed, the text shall continue. So I'm going to keep telling you to make sure you text me so you're in my text community. My number is 305-384-6894. Secondly, Work on Your Game University. That's the only place I do any coaching. I coach top 2% performers, or those who are expecting to join the top 2%. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. There we help you with our 4-part framework: mindset, strategy, systems, and accountability, and all the subtopics that go underneath those. That is all, again, at workonyourgameuniversity.com. All that out the way, let's get into this topic: fixable reasons why people disagree. Now, I told you all that the only platform on which I read other people's stuff and engage in the comments is a platform called X, formerly known as Twitter, and I still do. I like engaging there because, first of all, it keeps me up to date on current events, and it also just lets me see just what the zeitgeist of conversation is, because it just tells me what people are talking about when it comes to social topics, politics, sports, etc. And I basically find out about anything I hear about on some news site that says it happened. I go over to X, and then I go see what conversations are happening about it, so I can get a better feel for the whole situation. And it can give me all the links to all the different news platforms that are talking about things and all of that. So that is the way that I keep up on current events. I do not own a television, and I do not watch any news platforms. And I think most of them have sold their integrity anyway, but that's a different conversation for a different day. So I just crowdsource it basically from all the people talking about stuff, and I triangulate and figure out what the actual truth is through seeing what is being said. So anyway, one thing that I noticed in looking through conversations that people have on this application is that many disagreements that happen when I see people just going back and forth arguing about stuff, whether it be politics or dating and relationships or sports, it could be anything. And sometimes I'm involved in those conversations. I'm going to point them out here today because the disagreements stem from a few specific things. And those are the things that are going to be my points here today, and I'm going to point out and explain. These things are not necessarily made to encourage you to go get on X and start debating with people, unless you happen to be that type of person who likes to do that. I happen to like that. But to help you better navigate any disagreements you have in your everyday life off the internet. And you should have an everyday life that is off the internet, because these things apply both on and offline. Point number one. Topic, once again, is the fixable reasons why people disagree. Number one, this is the one that happens most often: two different conversations. This is when two people are having a conversation, but they're talking about two different things at the same time. This is when people are interpreting the same information in completely different ways. So they're looking at the exact same information. They're talking about the exact same facts. There's no disagreement on the facts of the situation, but they're looking at them from completely different angles. So they're seeing different things. It's kind of like you're standing in front of a statue of a person, and you're looking at that statue from the front. Another person looking at the same statue, but they're standing behind the statue. You are seeing completely different things, even though you're looking at the same item. All right, that's what happens with a lot of people, is that they're looking at the same this is why this is the main root of the disagreement. And the thing is, often neither of the people in the midst of the debate even realize what's happening. But I'm a person who, this is, again, my unique ability, folks, is breaking things down and putting them back together. So I notice this kind of stuff, and I can articulate and explain it to you. So this is what I'm doing right here. This doesn't make either person wrong. See, neither person is wrong, because one person's looking at the back of the statue, one person's looking at the front. They're both correct from their particular perspective, but the person in the front doesn't realize that the other person is looking from the back, and the person from the back doesn't realize the other person is looking from the front. So they both are telling the other one that they're wrong, when neither one of them realize that they both just have the wrong formula for how they're seeing the other person's perspective. It's just a failure of both people to make clear the context of the engagement. And this is what happens with a lot of folks, is that there's no clear context of the engagement. So one person has one context, the other person has another context, and neither one of them realize that they're not using the same context. So when you make the context clear and everyone's on the same page, then you can't have this situation of two different conversations. It's also described as, I heard a guy named Scott Adams, he's the first person I ever heard say this. He called it two movies, one screen. When you're looking at one screen, but you see two different things, or two people see two different things. And this context, this is one of the things that I do here on this show often. When you hear me talk about a topic that maybe people have heard about before, like when I did the two-part series on safe spaces, and when I talk about social justice, and when I talk about critical race theory, or I talk about Black Lives Matter, I talk about any subject that is something that is a term that is not brand new to you, and I was talking about it, I always frame the term and give a clear definition of where I'm coming from with that topic so that everyone has the exact same context. So when I make my points, you understand why I'm making that point, because this is the definition that I'm working with. If you have a different definition, that's completely fine, but your definition has nothing to do with the definition that I'm using, because I made clear what my context was. If I just jumped into the subject and start talking about it without giving you a context, that could confuse you, because you might be saying, well, Dre, I think this way. And I say, I think this way, but the problem is not that either of us is wrong the way we think, is that we didn't make clear the context. That's why it's my job as the person on the mic to make clear the context of what I'm talking about before I go into the content of the conversation. Everyone following me here? Okay, and this is also whenever two people are clear on a context, but one person finds themselves kind of on the downside of the conversation, they're kind of one down in the conversation. What happens often is people will try to change the context in order to find a way to be right. And this is often called moving the goalposts. Any of you ever been in a conversation with an angry female? That's usually what happens. That's a tongue-in-cheek joke, but I'm kind of not joking. Ladies, you know I'm not lying. All right, so there's a difference between being right and being accurate. I talked about this in episode number 2167 and also 2168, a little two-part series on being right versus being accurate, and how being right can endanger your success. So listen to those two episodes again, 2167 and 2168, and make sure you don't catch yourself trying to move the goalposts, i.e. change the context of a conversation just so you can find a way to be right, which again isn't the point anyway. If you ask 10 different people, for example, what happened on January 6, 2021 in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol building? Ask 10 different people that question. You might get 10 different interpretations of what people saw, heard, read, etc. Although we all know there was only one situation that occurred there. It was one truth of what happened there, but you get 10 different interpretations. Now, an interpretation does not necessarily mean a lie. It doesn't mean somebody's lying when they have a different interpretation. Again, if I'm looking at the front of the statue, you're looking at the back, and I tell you what I see, you tell me what you see, and they're completely different. Neither one of us is lying. We just have different interpretations because we're looking at things from a different angle, which is exactly what can happen with the news and stories like this. When there's a lot of different context from which to choose, this is how you can have so many people seeing so many different things from one singular situation. And again, this is how disagreements happen. It's the common reason why disagreements happen, because there can be so many different ways to interpret one piece of information. And this is why making clear the context is so important. This is why those of you who are or want to be a strong communicator, it is very important that you make clear the context of anything you talk about at the start of the conversation so there is no confusion. This is one of the reasons why there are people who, I don't usually do interviews on the show, but there are people who, on certain subjects, I would have them come on the show and have conversations with them, but I can't find anybody to come on with me because they know my ability to make clear context. See, when they know that I have the ability to make a clear context, they know that I am removing. Here's the key. Any of you who ever finds yourself in an argument or debate with a person, this is a pro tip that I'll give you. When you make clear the context of something at the beginning of a conversation, what you are doing is removing a person's ability to move the goalposts. So you can't move the goalposts on me when I make clear what the context was from the beginning. Now, if I don't make clear what the context is, then you can just move the goalposts every time I corner you on a topic. You can just move the goalposts somewhere else and just restart the conversation. And there are a lot of people who do this. But if you make clear the context, they can't do it. And especially if it's being documented, so that they can't lie. The whole point is that this is why I can't get anybody to come on the show, even if I wanted to do interviews. And one day, as I told you all already, one day there will be a feed. It's going to be separate from this one, where I will just interview people. It's not imminent. It's not on the calendar, but it is coming. So there's two different conversations phenomenon. often happens when there's a lot of different contexts to choose from, as I said. I see this happening on social media with basketball arguments. People arguing about basketball. And I get shown a lot of these. So sometimes I'll jump in a conversation and talk to people. So if you're talking about a career of an athlete, for example, who played 20 years of sports, they played football or basketball for 20 years. Let's say basketball. Most football players don't play that long. You got 20 years of context to choose from. You could say something that happened in year 5, something that happened in year 8, something that happened last night. You could choose a whole bunch of different, you have a lot of different contexts upon which to frame your point. And someone who's arguing the opposite of you, guess what? They also got 20 years of context to choose from. So y'all could be talking about the same person, but have completely different angles from what you're talking about. This is why many of these conversations are not designed to be concluded. They're designed to just go on and on and on because there's endless amounts of context. The context is always changing. So the conversation can never come to a conclusion because there's never a clear context. So someone can just pick any context they want to sensationalize and use it to rile up their audience, not necessarily because they're trying to reach a conclusion. This is exactly what you see in politics. When there's a campaign going on, like for example, right now, the 2024 presidential, not debates, but the campaigns are starting to heat up. And what you'll notice is that the candidates who are all trying to get there, they're all jockeying for position. They will all just use whatever context suits them in the moment when they want to bash their opponents. They just pick any context that they want and they'll just pick it and run with it to try to make their opponent look bad. And when they find one that is kind of working, they'll just keep using that same context over and over again. So you could pick any candidate you want. You can find 50 positive things about them. You can find 50 allegedly negative things about them because there's so many different contexts upon which you can pick, from which you can pick. And again, this is why these debates and these conversations, like our sports arguments, are not designed to be concluded. This is why sports talk TV shows and radio shows can come out every single day because they never reach a conclusion. Because if they reach a conclusion, then they won't have anything to talk about the next day. The show will be over. All right, so they're not looking for a conclusion. This is why you got to be hip to the game. So you got to be careful who you're talking to in certain instances because some people will get in conversations and debates and arguments not because they're trying to reach a conclusion, but because they just need something to do and you happen to be making yourself available. They're not trying to reach a conclusion. That's why they'll keep changing the context. If you want to reach a conclusion in any conversation, you must make clear the context at the start of it. Point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is why people disagree and the fixable reasons why this occurs, and of course, what to do about it. Number 2, too much emotion, not enough logic. And this one's easy for me to say because I'm a super logical individual. And many humans, especially on a topic that may hit home for them or be, for whatever reason, emotionally triggering for them, can't have a logical conversation on certain subjects. And again, this is a common human thing. As human beings are much more triggered and driven by their emotions than we are by any type of logical thinking. So something in someone's emotion, something that triggers a person's emotions will completely override anything logical or rational that they could have possibly been considering before that emotional trigger was pulled. In other words, an emotional trigger will override anything logical going on in a person's mind. Now, the thing is, some people's emotional triggers are more easily pulled than others, and some people's emotional triggers are more easily accessed than others. So, a person like myself, well, I just confess to you that I am a super logical individual. My emotional triggers are not easily pulled, nor are they easily accessed. It doesn't make me better than anybody, it's just different. Now, other people are very easily triggered emotionally, and they are very easily accessed emotionally. So you can almost kind of move them around, maneuver them, manipulate them, if you will, by using their emotions because they make their emotions so easy to access and easy to manipulate. And this is why I told you you're in emotional management. You're in the emotional management business. Any conversation in which one person is highly emotional for whatever reason, and the other person is not, or if both people are emotional, there will often be disagreements. When you got one emotional person or two emotional people in the conversation, there will usually be some disagreements. Why? Because emotion is not about thinking. Emotion is not rational or logical. It's about reacting to whatever the emotion is. Keep in mind, folks, emotions are great gas pedals. They are terrible steering wheels. I told you this in episode number 2155. And also remember that you are in the emotional management business. That was episode number 560. The job for you is not to smother your emotions and not have them, not feel them, but to recognize and keep them in check. In other words, keep them under your control. You never be under their control. And when you can do that, then it'll be easy for you to diffuse most disagreements or even stop them from even beginning in the first place. Point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is why most disagreements occur and the fixable reasons for them. Number 3, moving the goalposts. Touched on this in point number 1. This is one of the reasons, as I said, that I often define words and terms at the top of episodes to avoid, this is a specific reason why I do it, to make sure that I'm heading off anybody telling me that I'm wrong because they have a conflicting definition of a certain term that I'm using. So when I talk about a term like let's say soft skills, I did talk about that, or safe spaces, I define the term before I go into the subject, before I start talking about my points, so that everyone knows where I'm coming from and why I'm saying what I'm saying. So you can't come in and say, well, that's not the way to define, you're talking about it this way, but that means this. And I say, well, not based on the definition I'm giving. See, when I make clear the context, I eliminate any opportunity anyone has to move the goalposts. And one of the reasons that the two movies on one screen disagreement occurs is because one or both people in a conversation didn't clarify their context. And because of that, it's easy to just move the goalposts around. And now the conversation could go in circles, it could go in 10 different directions, and it never gets concluded. And again, for one or both people in the conversation, that might actually be the goal. So you got to be careful. If your goal is to actually come to a conclusion, be careful you're talking to someone who doesn't have that goal, because they will just, if there's no context laid out, they will just move the goalposts endlessly and just keep the conversation going, because again, they ain't got nothing else to do. Me giving definitions of words or reading the explanation of a term, I do that in these episodes specifically to make the context clear. So I want you to understand how I'm defining it, how I'm defining a subject or a word. So when I talk about it, you know why I'm talking about it that way and where I'm coming from. Again, this closes the door on anybody telling me that they define something differently in the way that I have defined it. I say, you may have a different definition for this word, or if it happens to be something that is loosely defined, most of the definitions I'm reading, I'm getting them from straight out of the dictionary if it's one word. But if it's a term or some type of phrase, then I'll cite the source that I'm getting it from, and I'll say, okay, I'm using this one because this one most fits the angle from which I'm coming. You may have a different angle, that's fine, but you can't argue your angle with mine because I made clear the context from the start of my episode. If you have a different angle and a different definition, then you got to record your own episode. All right, so I tell you, I often say this, everything I'm going to say here in today's episode is based on the definition that I just gave you. It's not based on your definition, not based on it's not open to interpretation. I'm giving you a clear definition, and everything I say is based on this definition. Human language has a lot of words at its disposal. There are a lot of words that we can use in any language in which you are fluent. You have a lot of words to choose. So when you leave a conversation wide open, where anyone can go in any direction, in other words, you don't build a fence around the conversation, then chaos ensues. See, clarifying context puts a fence around the conversation. Okay, we're talking about just this and this context, and this is the point we're trying to get to. That puts a fence around the conversation. All right, anything that happens in this conversation has happened within the confines of the parameters that I just laid out. Any of you who's a leader, you have leadership conversations with your teams or your families or the people you're around. You need to do this in your conversations. Frame the conversation. This is what we're talking about. This is why. This is what we're trying to get to. Here's the outcome that we need to get to. And here's how much time we got to figure this out. That puts a box around the conversation, and no one can step outside of that box. And if they do, you can redirect them and let them know, look, that's not the context of this conversation, which I already made clear to you at the beginning of the conversation. Now, if you don't make it clear, then the conversation can turn into a free-for-all. That's what happens. So when you put the fence up, it corrals people who can be slippery with their language, and people are just getting better and better at this slippery, passive-aggressive type of communication style. You got to corral these individuals and block them from moving the goalposts, and again, turn the conversation to a free-for-all, which is what a lot of people, they get really good at doing this. This is especially important when you're cornering a person and basically beating them up on a point that they have made. In other words, you're trying to prove somebody wrong, proving yourself right. And there are times to do that. I prefer accuracy over being right, but there are times when you may want to prove your point. Let's say a lawyer cross-examining a witness in court, you catch them in a lie, or you catch them saying something that makes them look stupid or destroys the case of your opponent. You want to get them in that corner and just beat them up like a boxer. You get your opponent in the corner, don't let them get out of the corner. You just want to keep pounding on them while they're there in that corner, but of course without getting counterpunched. But the whole point is you want to build a frame around that situation so you can keep taking advantage of that situation while it's where it is. All that said, let's recap today's class, which is fixable reasons why people disagree. And I see this through social media commentary on X, but this happens offline just as much. Number one, two different conversations. This happens when two people or more are interpreting the same information in completely different ways. Neither person is actually wrong. The problem is nobody made clear what the context was, so nobody can be right either because the context is not clear, which means two people can reach two completely different conclusions in the same conversation. And since nobody clarified the context, then nobody can win. Number two, too much emotion, not enough logic. Many human beings are easily triggered and allow easy access to their emotional triggers, which means they cannot think logically. And if you have a logical person and an emotional person having a conversation, that conversation is not going to go well. Doesn't matter who it is. If you have two emotional people, that conversation don't go well. The only way a conversation can really go well is when you have two completely logically thinking individuals talking together. All right, that's the only chance you have the opportunity of things going well. You have two logical people and still not get the outcome that you want to get to. And often you got to be careful with people because people can be slippery. Whereas someone may sound logical, but the words that they're saying are driven by emotions. So you got to be careful of that as well. You got to know somebody's angle. As long as you know the angle of the people that you're dealing with, you'll be able to discern if that happens to be the case. And number three, moving the goalposts. One reason why I often define words and terms at the top of this episode is just for this reason. So nobody can move the goalposts. I can build a fence around the topic, and I'm creating parameters for if you want to push back against me. I already laid out the parameters for how you can push back because I told you exactly what I was talking about and from where. So you can't come to me and say, well, I got a different definition of the word. So here's my comment based on my definition. I don't care about your definition. I gave you my definition. All right, if you have a different definition, you want to say it your way, all right, then start your own show. But I built that fence to make clear, here's where I'm coming from. And if you got to push back against this, then show me. So think about a lawyer cross-examining a witness in court. They always frame the conversation. Remember Johnny Cochran with O.J. Simpson. What did he say? If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. What was he doing? He was building a fence around the decision that the jury had to make. And he made it really simple. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. That's probably the most famous line ever said by a lawyer in court, and one of the most famous cases of all time, and it worked. All right, so think about how that can work on your behalf. All that said, text me, see you in my text community. My number is 305-384-6894. WorkOnYourGameUniversity.com, only place to work with me directly. That link down below in the description. Mindset, strategy, systems, and accountability. To work with me directly as your coach, that's the only place it happens. Again, WorkOnYourGameUniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre, all